Hello, my friends. I'm going to take a bit of a break from talking about tariffs. I mean, that story never stops, but I saw a crazy story out of Germany that says their spy agency knew back in 2020 that the virus came from the lab leak in China. You weren't allowed to say that, but they knew it for 5 years. I'll go through that, and then we'll talk to Sam Cooper about the latest in Trudeau's awful fundraising, friends. I'll get into it with Sam. But first, let me invite you to become a subscriber to what we call Rebel News Plus. That's the video version of this podcast. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com, click subscribe. It's $8 a month, which is not a ton of money to you. I know you might think that, but I have to say it really adds up for us. It really makes a difference here. So please consider going to rebelnewsplus.com and clicking subscribe. Tonight, the German spy agency knew the coronavirus came from China as early as 2020. So why did they keep it a secret? It's March 12th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you censorious thug.
I'm going to take a bit of a break today from the daily drama over tariffs and taxes and all that. I've been appearing on several U.S. shows every day trying to push a different agenda. The U.S. and Canada getting closer, no tariffs, doing lots of business, and being friends, not fighting in a quarrelsome way. Alas, it's apparently not in Mark Carney's interest or the mainstream media's interest. They see the value in fighting against Trump. I honestly don't think Trump realizes that the Canadian government is negotiating in bad faith, that the Canadian government has a moral hazard. The worse they can make things with Trump, the better their election chances are. I'm not sure if Trump knows that. Anyways, I was on Dave Rubin's show today. It's a big show. I taped Ann Coulter's show yesterday. That should be airing pretty soon. I'm, doing as much Trump-adjacent media as I can. I'm actually recording Charlie Kirk's show, if you've heard of him. My goal is to get the ideas into Trump's circle. But let me talk about something else for today. I saw this story today in various German media outlets. I'm going to quote from the Deutsche Welle, which is the German state broadcaster, like their version of the CBC. Here's their story. Just so you know, when I say BND, that's the German spy agency, sort of like Germany's CIA. So here's the story. COVID pandemic likely unleashed by lab mishap, Germany's BND. Germany's spy agency thinks an accident in a Chinese lab likely led to the COVID-19 pandemic, media say. Evidence it collected allegedly indicates negligence at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But that sort of hides the news, or as we say, it buries the lead, because it's not really news in 2025, 5 years after the crisis, to tell us this. What's actually the news here is not the facts about Wuhan. We already knew that. The news here is that the BND knew this 5 years ago and kept it secret. That is the news, wouldn't you agree? Funny now, that's not in the headline. That's weird. It's very CBC-ish of them to hide that from the headline. I'll read some more. Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service, the BND, concluded that the outbreak of the worldwide coronavirus pandemic in 2020 could well have been triggered by an accident at a Chinese laboratory that does virus research, German media reported on Wednesday. According to reports in the German papers Süddeutsche Zeitung and Zeit, the BND based its conclusion on the analysis of material from the public domain and that it collected in the course of an investigation with the code name Saarema. The material, some of which came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, located in the Chinese cities where the pandemic is believed to have started, indicated that there had been some risky research methods used there, compounded by breaches of public safety rules, the report said. The paper said there was evidence that Wuhan researchers carried out so-called gain-of-function experiments in which viruses occurring in nature are manipulated. Such research can cause changes in the way a virus causes illness, its transmissibility, and the types of hosts it can infect. There were also indications there had been numerous violations of safety regulations at the lab, according to the reports. So there it is. gain of function. You know what that phrase means, right? It's when scientists on purpose try to mutate and weaponize viruses to make them worse, to make them into weapons, into deadlier than they are. Let me read some more. The BND reached its conclusions as early as 2020. The paper said, giving them a likelihood rating of 80% to 95%, but the assessment was kept from the public at the time. Yeah, you don't say. Now, you don't get any more certain than 80 to 95% about anything in life, do you? Especially about something complex like a pandemic, 80 to 95% certainty. And yet, they kept this a secret for years, not just a secret. The government said the opposite. So they knew the truth. They buried the truth, but that wasn't all they did. They said the lie, knowing it was a lie, and we're only finding out now that they knew it was a lie. We knew the truth years ago, didn't we? Now we're just finding out that the government knew the truth and lied to us and tried to gaslight us, as they say. Here's Deutsche Welle reporting that the FBI knew the truth too. They stopped keeping quiet about it in 2023, again, once the worst was over. And the CIA admitted the same thing this January. The CIA says lab leak most likely source of COVID outbreak, of course. But for years, not only were you mocked by every establishment journalist and denounced by every public health expert and politician, but you were positively banned from publishing online that COVID was a Chinese bioweapon. If you said that on YouTube, you would violate their community guidelines and you could have your video canceled, your whole account could be struck. Same in Facebook, same in every social media. You weren't even allowed, I remember my book, China Virus, it was suspended because it contradicted officials. What does that mean? If you said that this was a Chinese bioweapon, you would be positively silenced. Now, these German and American spy agencies are not quite saying that it was a bioweapon. They don't use that word, but they're saying it using other words. So they're saying it was a Chinese government lab that specialized in gain of function. That's a bioweapon. So for years, you were not just mocked for speaking the truth, but more than that, you were punished for saying the truth. And yet the government knew the whole time that it was true. That's the meaning of today's German news. Their spy agency knew within weeks. So never let them ever tell you what is true or not. Never let them have the conceit that they are the arbiters of truth or not, that they have moral superiority over you, that they're better at figuring out the world than you and your ability to divine what is true or not. And the worst of all are those so-called fact checkers, many of them with government contracts to silence dissidents. Never trust them. Never forget what they did. Many of them are still in power. Many of them still want to use that power over you. They're trying to silence you and censor you even now. Do not forget that. Stay with us, more ahead. There's a saying, you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And I love that because it suggests that you are going to be involved one way or the other. Do you want to be active or passive? And I think that applies especially with foreign interference. You may not want to think about what Iran is doing here in Canada, or what the People's Republic of China is doing, or for that matter, other powers, both friendly and not so friendly. But Canada is a prize to be won economically, politically, in terms of our resources. I mean, it pains us to quarrel with our American cousins, but that shows that something valuable is here. And I mention that because, as you heard me say the other day, I don't know if we were on guard enough for Chinese interest in the liberal leadership race. There's a lot of news about China. And of course, we certainly don't want to make the mistake of confusing a Chinese Canadian who's a loyal Canadian citizen who's just ethnically Chinese or comes from China with an agent of the People's Republic of China. In fact, sometimes, as we've seen, that the greatest democratic activists, the pro-Canada activists in Canada that are targeted by the People's Republic of China are Chinese Canadians themselves. So we have to be careful, we have to be thoughtful, but we have to be on guard. And someone who studies foreign interference in Canada from China, Iran, and others is our special guest today. What a pleasure to have him come back on the show. I'm talking about Sam Cooper, who is the journalist behind the investigative news site, The Bureau. In-Depth.news. And it really is a must visit website. I don't say that about a lot of websites. I say that about Blacklocks, the Ottawa-based research journalists. And I say that about our guest today. Sam Cooper, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Great to be back, Ezra.
Sam, I want to ask you one question about the Liberal leadership race, and I just alluded to it. What was so interesting in the leadership race is that Mark Carney, who I don't think a lot of Canadians know very well. I mean, he was the head of our Bank of Canada, but that was decades ago. And he's spent a lot of time overseas in London and New York. And we've never seen him in the House of Commons because he's never been elected. And suddenly this guy goes from a private individual who I don't even know how strong his connections are to Canada, to be frank. He's catapulted to prime minister, all in an internal process by the Liberal Party that is done online. It wasn't ballot boxes with paper and pencils and scrutineers. It was just done online. And as we said in our program a few days ago, 400,000 people registered to vote, but only 150,000 were qualified to vote. And I just can't stop thinking, Sam, that process could have been susceptible to Chinese or Iranian or other influence. Imagine choosing a prime minister. Forget about 11 backbench MPs. A prime minister. Sam, what do you think? And I know that we're in the realm of speculation, so we don't want to go too far. But this thing has question marks all over, at least to me. What do you think? Take it away.
I would agree with you, absolutely. I can break down about 3 points. I mean, first of all, you're concerned that a prime minister could be chosen effectively through foreign interference, or at least significant influence. That came up in the Hogue Commission. That came up in the testimony of MP Michael Chan. And in fact, I have the documents. They didn't all come out at the Hogue Commission, everything I know, but documents did say that leadership campaigns are very susceptible to foreign interference. And that is because the rules around leadership campaigns are not as rigorous. You don't have Elections Canada overseeing it. It's up to the parties. And Ezra, I know you saw, as I did and many others noticed, there were 2 candidates rejected by the Liberal Party. We don't exactly know why, but there were strong suggestions that potentially India or other nations could have been interested in those candidates. Those candidates certainly didn't seem to agree. But what else mounted was that it was overtly recognized, I suppose, due to my work that put the spotlight on Canada's election threat monitor. They disclosed that Chrystia Freeland was the target of significant disinformation or cyber attacks, rather reputational attacks on WeChat, which, as you know, was the very same vector used to attack Conservative MP Kenny Chiu. And I said to you before, as I've said to others, why was Chrystia Freeland attacked? She took some very strong regulatory measures against a bank that is connected allegedly to Chinese individuals related to the Chinese state and money laundering. And Mark Carney, he wasn't attacked. And I, in my own open source research, have recognized that he appears to be quite a favorite in Chinese media. So you have Chrystia Freeland attacked in a Chinese media sort of vector. Mark Carney appears to be very supported. So that tells you, where did those 200 or 300,000 extra membership votes go? That's a very live question. I think we need to know more.
Yeah, and there may be a perfectly legitimate explanation. It might actually be an excellent explanation. Maybe they encountered some foreign source who was a foreign computer trying to meddle. We should know about that. So maybe it was a success to keep out 200,000 plus voters. But if we don't know anything about it, I think all we can do is fill in the gaps with our own imagination. And as you say, it's not pure speculation because we know from the past what has happened. And if China would go to the lengths they did to knock out individual MPs or to install individual MPs, well, the prime minister is the greatest prize of all. I want to throw one more thing at you. And again, we're in the realm of speculation because we don't have the inside information. I looked at the results district by district. The Liberal Party was kind enough to put meticulous data on their website. Every single vote all 150,000 of them, and then they did the percentages. And I started going through it and I saw, wow, almost every district has not the exact number of votes, but the percentage was, it didn't deviate much. What I'm saying is Mark Carney got around 86% in every single district, in the North, in the South, in the East, in the West, in French Canada, in English Canada, in the rural parts, in the urban parts. And they, obviously not the exact same number, but it was astonishing to me. There was no variation. There was one riding, where I think he got a low of 75% and one where he was in the 90s. But everything, the bandwidth was so narrow, and I thought, what are the odds of that? And then I looked at Chrystia Freeland's own district, and you'd think if there would be any place in the country where she would do well, it would be in her own district. Only 188 votes for her in her home riding. Same with Karina Gould, only 190 votes. I'm not talking percent, I'm talking total votes. And I tell you, Sam, I sound like I'm hollering into the wind like a crazy person. I know it might sound that way, but one of the problems is I think you would probably need Karina Gould or Chrystia Freeland to complain about it for any facts to come out. Because I have no standing, you have no standing. Like you said, this is an internal party vote. So it's not like Elections Canada could take a look. I feel like, and again, there may be perfectly reasonable explanations for why Chrystia Freeland, after 10 years in politics, only got 180 votes in her hometown. But boy, I tried to use AI to do some statistical analysis, and I'm not a mathematician or statistician, but the answer I got on AI was that the results in Chrystia Freeland's riding, well, I'll just say it, Grok, which I really put through the paces, that's an AI engine, said it was a 2.7% chance that those numbers were the way they are, and they had the different factors in there. Sam, I won't go on this tangent any longer because we don't know the facts. I just feel we sure need some reassurance here. I just feel like I've watched a bank robbery and no one rang the alarm, Sam.
Well, I mean, that's some great data parsing. I haven't taken that step myself, but if you see probabilistically, if you see, the same percentages, upwards of 80 across the board, as you're saying, and I was struck by the lowness of Ms. Freeland's overall totals. She's the one with years of experience and the name in politics. And on the other hand, I'm just looking, at pattern recognition, putting together Mr. Carney, as you said, coming out of nowhere with, of course, a great global reputation, but put that together with the facts that it seemed that Justin Trudeau's top aides just coagulated around Mr. Carney, and it seemed ushered him towards that leadership. So you do, with my investigative mind, there are questions worth raising there, and those data points you raise, that only increases sort of the spidey sense is tingling a little bit, I'd say.
Yeah. What I liked about the Grok response to me, that's that AI engine, is that it said, by the way, there may be liberals who were punishing her for sort of detonating Justin Trudeau. And, maybe there was a bandwagon effect. So I felt like the AI was actually quite reasonable, more reasonable than me, because I'm a bit of a critic. Anyways, I won't spend more time on that subject. And I thank you for engaging with it. I think we're both a little bit in the dark, because unless one of the four candidates were to make a fuss about it, I don't think the Liberal Party would look into it.
Can I add one more thing? Just you're triggering something in my mind, and others have raised it. There was a lot of mysteriousness around how it appeared Mark Carney had taken Chrystia Freeland's job, and it appeared even Mr. Trudeau himself was stunned and shocked when that didn't happen. And then another set of events happened. Some have commented it looked like Mr. Trudeau in his speech, I think in front of Rideau Cottage, had the face of a man that was betrayed. So I don't want to get into speculation. What I'm suggesting is there's a lot of interesting pieces moving around. I do think it warrants certainly more investigative probing or more commentary that we'd hear than we'd hear out of the usual Ottawa politicos.
Yeah, it felt like an inside job. I mean, and remember, and I'm thinking again to the case of Han Dong, where you had foreign nationals bust in. The Liberal Party rules they, quote, tightened them up a bit, but even under their tightened rules, foreign nationals with permanent residence were allowed to vote, and people as young as 14 years old. I mean, there's a lot of questions there, but because we only have questions and no answers, I think it's best we move on to your huge scoop, which I want to get to. But thanks very much for letting me bounce some ideas off you on that. I just can't get over how it felt like I was watching someone flip a coin and get heads 100 times in a row, and I felt like saying that's not natural, and I don't know. I feel like I'm shouting into the wind. But let me switch gears. And I thank you for talking to me about those. And I think we both have to acknowledge we only have a little bit of information. There may be a perfectly good explanation behind it, but I don't feel like giving the Liberal Party the benefit of the doubt. Let me move on to your big scoop, and I've got it in my hand here, and folks can read this on your website, thebureau.news. Headline: exclusive: Chinese narco suspect caught in private meeting with Trudeau, investigated by the DEA, that's the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, linked to Panama, Caribbean, Mexico, says police sources. And I'm just going to read the first sentence, and then I'd love it if you took it away. Shocking new details are emerging about a major Chinese organized crime suspect who met privately with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, according to a police source who confirmed recent reporting from the Globe and Mail. The individual, Paul King-Jin, is allegedly implicated in money laundering operations spanning the Western Hemisphere and has been a target of multiple failed major investigations in BC. Sort of incredible that we're only hearing about this now that Trudeau's gone. What do you think, Sam?
Well, I mean, it is incredible that we're only hearing that detail after Mr. Trudeau was at the door or out the door. But Ezra, that type of meeting was the subject of my book, Willful Blindness, published in 2021. And so I was, I would say the journalistic subject matter expert on the poster boy of Chinese fentanyl money laundering networks, Mr. Paul King-Jin, this alleged narco that I didn't know was captured in RCMP surveillance in a private meeting with Mr. Trudeau. However, that's a great detail. Kudos to the Globe and Mail for picking that up. And so I built upon that story. I went back to a source and said, yes, indeed, they were aware that this surveillance found Mr. Trudeau there. But what I did know, Ezra, was that I have reported for years that another individual in that private meeting is a senior former People's Liberation Army official. I know you know something about PLA officers coming to Canada and the concerns that raises. Well, look, even if you're a former PLA officer, CSIS will track you in Canada. The RCMP will track you. And so I knew that this extremely powerful, wealthy PLA veteran is believed, and I'm not going to name the name in this broadcast, but is believed by Canadian police intelligence to be involved in sort of security networks tied to Beijing that are involved in interoperability with Chinese organized crime. And again, let's focus on Mr. Jin. My information, which I added in this story, is that he's a frequent flyer. He's going down to Mexico. He's going down to Panama, which, as you know, Panama is of great concern to the US government for Chinese influence, alleged Chinese illicit financial activity. This man, Paul King-Jin, involved in alleged human trafficking, sexual prostitution, activities in a hotel in Richmond, not specifically this hotel. But what I want to say is, again, let's talk about the questions surrounding a proven fact that Mr. Trudeau, for a reason that we don't know, is in a private conference room with what Canadian and US law enforcement believe is an extremely important figure in Western Hemisphere money laundering, drug, fentanyl, commodities trading, and that there are other apparently very politically connected individuals in that room. And so why was Mr. Trudeau there? I've never heard, I'll tell you this, I asked previously the Prime Minister's office why this People's Liberation Army veteran who was in that room with Mr. Jin and Mr. Trudeau donated to Justin Trudeau. And all I got back was what I would call boilerplate, the PMO saying, we follow all Elections Canada donation rules.
Yeah. Boy, there's so many things. And it's interesting that this is only coming out now. I wonder what else will come out and what else will never come out. I feel like the RCMP had a lack of curiosity during Trudeau's term. I mean, a few things come to mind. For example, the SNC Lavalin matter, where they put so much pressure on the Justice Minister of the day, Jody Wilson-Raybould, not to prosecute their buddies at SNC Lavalin, that she quit over it, or she was fired. And we never heard from the RCMP on that or a half dozen other similar matters where the RCMP just sort of shrugged. And again, that may be because there was no fire under that smoke, but I just feel like maybe we don't have the same checks and balances that they do in the US, for example. I don't know. And I don't want to just be speaking through my partisanship, because I'm obviously a critic of Trudeau. So it's not like I want all my enemies to be investigated and all my friends not to be. But boy, what you talk about here, I suppose there's nothing wrong with a meeting. And if the election donation laws were followed, I suppose that's fine. But my God, it stinks, doesn't it? Holy mackerel.
It stinks a lot. And Ezra, I can tell you, because I have the capacity to talk to law enforcement experts in Canada and the United States at a high level. Look, again, I'm not specifically a critic of Mr. Trudeau, but I can tell you with 100% confidence, my sources, and I've now quoted them, say that there are more than one meetings of Mr. Trudeau with known Chinese organized crime suspects, and these come in the context of political donations meetings. Paraphrasing from memory, one of the quotes in my recent stories, a Canadian policing expert said, look, he is not, or they are not accusing Mr. Trudeau of corruption, but we would have to be naive to think that people of extreme wealth, so in the billion-dollar range, and connected to Chinese organized crime, would not be seeking influence with a Canadian leader. So why do these meetings continue? And Ezra, I'll tell you one more thing. Look, 2 data points. Again, one of my sources in a recent story said there was a FinTrack study, FinTrack, the Canadian financial watchdog, 900 million transacted from a Hong Kong currency exchange into Canadian banks. And that is, my police sources knew a number of suspects involved were seen in meetings with Mr. Trudeau. Again, these are suspects that are related to China. They are related to CSIS investigations, RCMP organized crime investigations. And my last point is, again, in that Hogue Commission, where some things, much like a whale, maybe they touch the surface, but we don't see the whole thing. The RCMP admitted for some reason we heard about a money laundering investigation, which was believed to connect to Chinese state activity. The RCMP said they didn't pursue it because essentially there are so many money laundering networks and investigations. Their answer was they didn't think they'd make an impact looking into it, which again, if we're talking about, that doesn't prove anything, but it looks a little bit smoky in my view.
Yeah. I just compare the reaction by the Canadian government to China putting a 100% tariff on Canadian canola. I don't hear any squawking, let alone countervailing tariffs. And I think over the years, Canada has been pretty lenient on China, even when they had 2 Canadian hostages. I don't know. I feel like foreign influence in this country, as I started the show, I mean, you may not think about it, but it sure thinks about you. And I'm glad you're out there, Sam. And I want to thank you for spending the time. And thanks for letting me throw you the curveball of those election results. I'm running them through my brain and I just can't make sense of them. And I'm glad that you weighed in as far as you could. Sam, thank you for joining us. Folks, if you're not reading it, you got to start going to thebureau.news. You will see some of Sam's work percolate into the mainstream. So I'm glad that he has the ear of of a lot of people, but I think it behooves you to brief yourself on what he's up to in his investigations. So we're so grateful to you, Sam. Thanks for taking the time.
Great to be here, Ezra.
Right on. Thank you. Stay with us. More ahead. Hey, welcome back. Your letters to me on Doug Ford and the tariff war. Jesus Christ 7120, I'm not sure if that's a real name, says premiers have no authority to impose any tariffs on a sovereign country. Their jurisdiction is only provincial. What the heck is going on in Canada these days? High taxes, provincial trade bans, no job opportunities, back and forth with America. Yeah, I don't like it one bit. Obviously, I don't want Canada being roughed up by anyone, including Donald Trump. But boy, oh boy, is the Canadian side so obviously just trying to make a big fight out of this. John Douglas says, no thanks for Ford telling Alberta what to do. As a politician, he's doing a terrible job. Yeah, could you imagine if Alberta said, hey, Ontario, take one for the team, and to punish America, don't sell them any cars or some weird thing like that? It would just be so outrageous. But then again, have you seen any media or government or establishment people call out China for their 100% tariffs on Canadian canola? John Doe says the real reason is why is Parliament still prorogued? Do the Liberals need the Conservative premiers to do their job for them? Or is the trade war not important enough for Carney because they're still trying to figure out how to remove the carbon rebate while increasing the carbon price on 10 out of 10 households? Yeah. You know, we are in a democratic lacuna, if I'm using that word right. It's so funny how the left accuses the right, including Donald Trump, including, you know, any conservative premier or prime minister being fascist and anti-democratic. We are existing in a democratic nullity. Our parliament has been dissolved. It has not been recalled. I do not trust the method by which Mark Carney was selected. I want to know where the 250,000 rejected votes are. And I'm sorry, I don't believe the statistical likelihood of Mark Carney getting pretty much the same vote in every single district, French or English, north or south, rural or urban, you know, right wing, left wing, whatever, including in the riding of University Rosedale. I'm sorry, I don't like Chrystia Freeland much, but I do not believe that after 10 years in politics, she only got 188 votes in her entire district over 100,000 people. I don't believe that, and I don't think you do too, but that is the democracy we're in. Mark Carney was just installed. He was just selected, injected. It is a soft coup, certainly not democratic, and the fact that they haven't recalled Parliament is even worse. My friends, that's the show for tonight. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.